Kyle Busch's future, Richard Childress Racing, could be in question as some tension on the radio from this past week at Phoenix, and Brad Keselowski continues to reiterate that there's interest in maybe opening up an O'Reilly Auto Parts Series team for RFK Racing in the future, but money is going to be a factor. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and our motorsports story discusser today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump through those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a ton of paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Daniel Dye's 2026 Mopar throwback scheme that we'll see next weekend at Darlington Raceway. This is a throwback to Dennis Etzer's car from the 1990s to the early 2000s. This absolutely looks incredible. I think Kaulig Racing and Tanner T. Witt knocked this scheme out of the park. The cars look fantastic. They look spot on. Looking forward to the racetrack next weekend at Darlington. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tyler Reddick's 2026 Jordan brand scheme that we'll see this weekend in Las Vegas. This is in homage of Kurt Busch, who of course got his last NASCAR Cup Series win with design in 2022 at Kansas. I love the look of this car, to be honest. I think it's a fantastic throwback in a sense to Kurt Busch's last win. The colors look very good, and I think the 2011 Racing knocked it out of the park. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Roger Carreur's 2026 Donut Media scheme that we'll see this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Jordan Anderson Racing did an awesome job on this paint scheme. The colors pop very, very well, and I think it's awesome to see Donut Media in the sport sponsoring a car in the NASCAR Auto Parts Series. The colors look good. Looking forward to the racetrack this weekend at Las Vegas. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Kyle Sieg's 2026 Signer Fuse scheme that we'll see this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Paint scheme looks okay in my opinion. I think there's some good things about it for sure, but it's not the most perfect paint scheme we've seen. It does look okay, but good to see a new sponsor in the sport. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Brendan Buttermean Queen's 2026 Cummins throwback scheme that we'll see this next weekend at Darlington. This is a throwback to the Cummins car that ran in the early 1950s in Indianapolis 500. This scheme looks absolutely incredible. I think Kaulig Racing absolutely knocked this throwback out of the park. The colors look fantastic. Looking forward to the racetrack next weekend at Darlington Raceway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Riley Hurst's 2026 FRE Pouches scheme that we'll see this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway and a couple of the races throughout the 2026 NASCAR Cup season. The scheme looks alright in my opinion. I think it's good to see a new sponsor in the sport. It's good to see a new paint scheme working with the team, and good to see Riley Hurst have a different sponsor outside of Monster Energy for the weekend. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tyler Reddick's 2026 Supply House scheme that we'll see this weekend at Las Vegas, and I believe a couple of the races throughout the 2026 year. I like the look of the car, to be honest. I think there's a simplistic look to it, but it's also great to see Supply Houses coming in and working with Reddick. We knew they would be with him this year, but I think it's great they're officially coming in. I think the car looks all right. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Minnie Terrell's 2026 Dodge throwback scheme that we'll see next weekend at Darlington Raceway. This is a throwback to that kind of look that Robert Presley had, I believe, back in 2002. This scheme looks really, really awesome in my opinion. I think that the Kaulig team knocked this one out. It looks really good. It's a nice throwback, nice homage to Robert Presley. Looking forward to the racetrack next week. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Chase Briscoe's 2026 Wix filter schemes that we'll see in a couple NASCAR Cup Series events in 2026 and in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series race this weekend at Vegas. Love the look of the car, to be honest. Pretty cool to see Wix filters, which did sponsor Stu Haas Racing and Tony Stewart, I believe JJR back in the day. Good to see him being on a car. I think colors look really good. They pop. Looking forward to the racetrack throughout the 2026 season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Super.com. As it was reported yesterday by Adam Stern, the NASCAR has brought on Super.com as a new sponsor in 2026, an official partner of the company. They'll be offering die-casts to NASCAR fans or discounts to NASCAR fans throughout the 2026 year, and some discounts on tickets, merchandise, among other things as well. It's interesting considering the fact that Super.com is actually going to be working with Rickware Racing throughout 2026. I'm pretty sure might be working with some other teams. We've been seeing this a lot more commonly. Remember, Hardee's has got a partnership with NASCAR and 2011 Racing, and there's another sponsor, I'm pretty sure, that's working with NASCAR, like Freeway Insurance as being a premier partner of NASCAR, but also working with Daniel Soros throughout the year. Pretty interesting move nonetheless, and I think it's interesting that Super.com has been brought on as a partner. We'll see how this pans out for a lot of people and see what interest comes from it, but Super.com is coming in as a partner. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Rockingham Speedway. As there was a report originally, I believe, by Matt Weaver yesterday, that Rockingham Speedway has announced a train from NC DOT for 2026. The NC Department of Transportation had this type of transportation last year, I'm pretty sure, for train service. They could basically go from, I believe, an area of the country or from the North Carolina area and can take it over to Rockingham Speedway. I think something like this is actually really exciting to see. I think it's a really huge deal for the people that are interested but maybe not have enough gas or something like that, not sure. They just wanted to travel in a much easier way in that front. Nonetheless, I think it's really, really cool to see this. I think it's good they're doing it once again. Well, I've seen stuff like this, and I think it definitely is a big win, and I think it's a huge win for something like this to happen in the sport. Pretty interesting stuff and good to see, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about some new pit box rules for 2026. As Boise Tatabreva put out a report earlier today on his Twitter page earlier this evening that apparently there are some new pit box rules that are coming into play starting this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. He reports that chemicals no longer can be used on pit road, and if you're going to clean the pit stalls, you have to use hand cleaning, I'm pretty sure, for going forward. The other big rule, cleaning can only be done during garage hours on race day, so teams cannot come in the night before and clean the pit boxes before they get on the racetrack. For example, if the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series race takes place at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, Cup Series teams who are stationed on those same pit boxes for the Cup Series race, they cannot come in and use chemicals, and they cannot go on those pit boxes. For what some have said, like Boise have said there was issues at Phoenix Racing when it came to cleaning pit boxes. Some of the procedures were not being used at the point, which is why I think these rules are coming into effect. You definitely question stuff like this a little bit, though. They're making new rules for stuff like this. Seems like every year we got new rules when it comes to pit boxes because chemicals have been used to try to clean a pit box a lot more. So I get it to an extent, trying to basically be a little more safe, I guess, not having chemicals on pit road. I guess that's the reason why they're doing it. Not really sure at this point. Nonetheless, I think it's interesting, and I think there's a good reason for it, but also some questionable reasons why we're making moves like this, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Bill Elliott. As it was reported by Colby Evans, aka RCR in Park Car, he reports that Bill Elliott is running another vintage race this weekend at another track with the SVRA Series. He will be driving a 2005 Dodge Charger, a Charger that's very similar to the one that Casey Kane ran when he drove for Abraham Motorsports back in 2005. It's really awesome seeing Bill Elliott did this. We talked about this last week, or about 2 weeks ago, when Bill Elliott competed in Sebring and actually won his class. And now Bill Elliott is once again competing in the events in the SVRA. It is amazing to see Bill Elliott, even at the age of 70, still competing at top-level motorsports or local levels for that matter, and being fast and really competitive at his age. For someone who, in my opinion, is one of the most, maybe one of the best ever raced in the sport with 40 career NASCAR, or over 40 career wins, or close to that, I'm pretty sure, and having a lot of success in sports across the board. So I think it's exciting stuff. It's good to see him have a Dodge Charger, get behind the wheel of a car racing once again. I think it's great for sure, nonetheless, and I think it's exciting and fantastic to see that Bill Elliott got the chance and opportunity to do a vintage race. I think it's been great for the sport and great for motorsports to see Bill Elliott competing and being very competitive as well. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the CW. As it was reported by Adam Stern earlier today that the CW is getting NASCAR involved with one of its scripted series for the first time since the partnership came into effect in late 2024 going into 2025. Justin Allgaier, of course, won the championship in 2024 in the NASCAR Rally Auto Parts Series and just won the most recent race at Phoenix International Raceway. He's appearing on the show Wild Cards. I never watched Wild Cards before, don't know the premise of the show, to be honest, but I think this is a really huge deal that a network is getting one of the drivers involved. What this shows is that the CW is very, very committed to the NASCAR brand. And obviously they have a deal with NASCAR through 2031. So having people like Justin Allgaier, who are one of the big stars of the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, and someone who maybe doesn't have the biggest personality, but going on a show like this can not only be really huge for the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series across the board, but can be really huge for someone like Justin Allgaier. I don't know the ratings for Wild Cards, but I've heard the ratings are decent for Wild Cards, so maybe it's going to create some interest for people to tune in to the NASCAR Rally Auto Parts Series. I think that's something that could be a huge win for the series across the board. So I think this is awesome to see. I love to see that Justin Allgaier is appearing in a new show. I think it's a big win, like I said, in a sense for the sport. I think people like it for sure, and I think people should be very happy to see something like this, as I think it's really cool that Justin Allgaier is appearing in a new show, like the Wild Card show that is going out. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jacob Lofland. as it was announced yesterday that Jacob Lofland will be the Grand Marshal for the NASCAR Rally Auto Parts Series race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. If you're in the NASCAR circles, many of you are not going to recognize that name, but Jacob Lofland was the narrator for what we saw on the Kaulig Race for the Seat show. He was part of that show that happened last year to determine who was going to win the seat. We all know Minnie Terrell was the driver, won the seat for the Ram Race for the seat, and Jacob Lofland was one of the big names that was involved in that. On top of it as well, Jacob Lofland has appeared in movies and some pretty big TV shows as well. I think Jacob's going to do a really good job. It seems like he has a big passion for motorsports and is really interested in motorsports currently at the moment. So I think he'll do a really good job given the command. I think it's awesome he's getting the chance and opportunity to be the Grand Marshal for an event like this. Really awesome stuff. Hope he does a good job. I think he'll bring a lot of energy, and I certainly do think he'll bring a lot of excitement to the sport and a lot of excitement to the command for the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series event. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Greenville-Pickens Speedway. As it was reported by Adam Sturm yesterday or a couple days ago that Pickens County leaders voted against the demolition of Greenville-Pickens Speedway. Despite a lot of people being opposed against Greenville-Pickens Speedway, the track is not going away anytime soon. It seemed like the majority of the voters really wanted the track to stay around, while like I said, some were not very interested in keeping the track around. This is a very huge win, not only for racing fans, but it's a really huge win for the people that are fans of Greenville-Pickens Speedway. Greenville-Pickens Speedway is one of those tracks that's been around for a very, very long time. It's hosted late model races, also has hosted NASCAR Cup Series events back in the early days of the sport. I think there was interest at one point having even truck and O'Reilly Auto Parts Series races at the track in the last couple of years. There's going to be some late model events, some renovations, I believe, that are being planned currently at the moment for Greenville-Pickens Speedway, with this decision being finalized. And I think this is a huge win across the board for the motorsports personnel. I think a lot of people are really happy about the news, and I think it's great to see that Greenville-Pickens Speedway is not going anywhere anytime soon, which again, I think is a big win for the sport, right? I think a lot of people absolutely did not want to see this track go away, because we've lost so many tracks over the years. We've lost Irwindale Speedway not too long ago. Rockford Speedway in the last couple of years has gone away as well. So I think that we need to continue seeing tracks continue to be in the motorsports. And I think having a track sticking around like this, that is a huge win. I don't want to see any tracks go away. So a big win, and a big win for people in that area of North Carolina, South Carolina especially, and because there's issues with keeping tracks around. So good to see Greenville-Pickens Speedway isn't going anywhere, and will be sticking around for the foreseeable and the long-term future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey Heim. As it was announced earlier today that Corey Heim, in addition to making 12 starts across the board in the NASCAR Cup Series and making some starts in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series this year, will be racing some late models in 2026. He's going to make 3 starts in the Cars Tour in 2026, and then he is going to run the VSCU 300. The team we'll be driving for will be one of the top teams in late models, and that is none other than Nelson Motorsports. First of all, I think it's great to see that Corey Heim is doing some stuff in the Cars Tour. He's going to be one of the big draws and one of the big superstars that is competing in those Cars Tour events. And I think he's got a really good chance and a really good opportunity to win all those races, because while the talent pool is very, very strong in there, we know how talented of a driver Corey Heim is. And for the VSCU 300, which is the biggest event, one of the biggest late model events in the country, one of the biggest late model events that happens at the track, it is a huge deal for Corey Heim to be out there. I think Corey Heim is going to go into that VCSU 300 as obviously maybe the favorite, if not one of the favorites, to go out there and pick up the win. What's also great to see is Corey Heim is continuing to grow his resume for the year and getting more starts. It's frustrating, I think, a lot of us that Corey Heim is not full-time in NASCAR Cup competition this year, because many of us would agree that Corey Heim should be full-time in the NASCAR Cup Series at this time, but there's obvious reasons why Corey Heim is not getting the chance and opportunity to be full-time. The main reason being is because sponsorship funding plays a role, and unlike a guy like Riley Hurts, Corey Heim doesn't bring the funding and sponsor, which is frustrating, because I think a team should be sponsoring him at this point so he can be full-time. But going back to Corey, it's good to see that he'll at least be racing in 2026, racing more events especially. I think he'll do a really solid job, and I think he'll certainly be a factor to win some of those late model races later this year, and the Cars Tour, and certainly the VSU 300 as well. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Conor Daly. As it was announced on Wednesday morning that Conor Daly will be racing in the 2026 Indianapolis 500. As expected, he'll drive the number 24 or the number 23 for Rockingham Racing. His teammate in this year's upcoming Indy 500 will once again, I believe, be Jack Harvey. Of course, is a Fox correspondent and a Fox pit road reporter. He'll be joining Jack Harvey in that event. We've been hearing rumors that Conor Daly was likely going to get a drive to run the 2026 Indianapolis 500 once again with Rockingham Racing, but we weren't sure when that was going to officially get announced. This is going to be a really strong opportunity for Conor Daly. Last year in the Indianapolis 500, I believe he competed for the Rockingham Racing team and put together a really strong and really fantastic performance. And if I'm not mistaken, led laps in last year's Indy 500, but the strategy got away from him last year and lost a shot and opportunity to go to victory lane. When you think of Rockingham Racing, while there has been some interest in that team, maybe going full-time in IndyCar, their main focus, of course, with Cusick Motorsports is to win the Indianapolis 500, and they have not been able to get that at this point. They've come close multiple times with Conor Daly. They've come close with Ryan Hunter-Reay once or twice. Ryan Hunter-Reay last year nearly got the win for the organization. And I do think that Conor Daly has a great chance and opportunity to win it if the equipment's fast. Because Rockingham Racing, generally, like I mentioned before, they do bring some pretty fast and really strong cars. So we'll see what happens for Conor Daly. But like I said, I think he's going to be certainly a big factor. I think he will be a top 10 threat without question. I know people think he's not talented, but he's a good oval racer. Remember what he did last year, actually, with the 77 car for the Juncos Hollinger team. That team he actually drove for. I wanted to correct myself on that. That he drove last year for Juncos and was really good last year in the event. I think Conor's got a good shot this year with Rockingham. It's a shame he's not full-time in IndyCar right now, but I think he's going to be a factor, and I think he's going to do a really good job behind the wheel. I'm excited to see what he can do in this year's Indy 500, as I think, again, he'll be a factor and a major threat to go out there and pick up the win in this year's Indy 500 if he can make the show. It's unknown how many cars are going to show up right now. I think 33 are confirmed. It's unknown if there will be a 34 car for this year's Indy 500 at this time. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Fox. Now, Ryan DaCosta, who is a social media manager for motorsports.com on X and also their manager for their website as well, put out a little bit of a tweet that got a little bit of controversy around it, and it's once again surrounding NASCAR on Fox. Now, if you take a look at this post, it doesn't look really offensive at the point until you take a look at it. Number one, it's Fox promoting the NASCAR Cup Series race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Now, they're showing Tyler Reddick horses won the first 3 NASCAR Cup Series events in 2025. But if you take a look at it, you can say that there is a lot of AI going on with it. They didn't use any of the stock footage of Tyler Reddick picking up wins in the first 2 races. No. They're using footage of AI in their promos for the race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. And I had to call this out a little bit. It's like, you're telling me you couldn't have used a burnout photo when he won the Daytona 500. You're telling me you couldn't have used a promo photo when he won Atlanta Motor Speedway. You couldn't have used a promo photo from some of his other wins, like the Kansas win from a few years ago for that matter, even though it wasn't on the same network. Still, you're telling me that you couldn't have used any of that promotion photos. Instead, you had to go with AI. That's what frustrates me with Fox. Fox, in my opinion, I've talked about this year, their coverage this year, I would say, has actually gotten better. And they have been doing a better job in some areas. Mike Joy, even though he makes mistakes from time to time, Mike Joy has been objectively better in 2026. And Clint Bowyer and Kevin Harvick from time to time, they have really, really good chemistry. And both, I think, are doing a better job this time around. And, of course, I think there's been good things that Fox has done. The lack of full-screen commercials. Yes, they have a lot more side-by-side, but there's a lack of full-screen commercials during Green Flag, which is a big step in the right direction, and most networks aren't even doing that outside of Amazon Prime. Not even NBC's doing that, and I would say NBC has better broadcast. The USA has better broadcast currently at the moment than Fox has currently at the moment. But stuff like this is just infuriating to me and frustrating, because it's like, guys are getting things right. They're turning the corner in some areas, but stuff like this, in my opinion, just can't fly. You also got to get your truck broadcast better, because certainly the Truck Series broadcasts have not been really good in recent times, but that's for another day at this point. Nonetheless, I think it's frustrating that Fox just seems to get in their way a lot of times. I think many are frustrated about it, and they certainly want things to be better on that front. I really hope Fox gets better in the future, because right now I think Fox's coverage could be better, but right now I don't think it's the greatest, and I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done with Fox's coverage across the board, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about RFK Racing. Now, we've got a lot of RFK Racing stories to talk about today on the channel. But I talked about this story on the channel earlier today or yesterday when you're watching this video. as it was announced yesterday that RFK Racing will be doing tribute paint schemes at Darlington next week for Greg Biffle. They're doing tribute paint schemes for Greg Biffle next weekend with the stylized number font. Keselowski is driving a number 6, which I think might be a little bit homage to Greg Biffle's National Guard car, maybe the subway car he ran, I'm pretty sure. Then you have Chris Buescher, who's driving a throwback to Greg Biffle's 2011 pole that he got at Texas Motor Speedway. And then you have Ryan Preece, who is doing a tribute to Greg Biffle's scheme he had back in 2009 at the Daytona 500. All three of these schemes, in my opinion, look very good. Are they perfect? No. But I think they do look really solid, and I do think RFK Racing in general did a really good job. What's also great about this is they're doing homages and they're doing tributes to Greg Biffle once again. Earlier this year in the Daytona 500, RFK Racing, they did tributes to Greg Biffle with the number font. They weren't the only team that did a tribute. Conor Racing did a tribute on their number 16 car, and a lot of these teams had decals and patches honoring Greg Biffle. Because, of course, Greg Biffle, all of his success came over RFK Racing, who won the championship in 2000 in trucks, the first championship for RFK in the NASCAR side of things. And then, of course, they won the championship in 2002 in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, and Greg Biffle nearly became the first driver to win all 3 championships ever. No one had ever done that at that point, and Greg Biffle finished second in the championship just behind Tony Stewart back in 2005. I think that it's amazing they're doing this. I think it's a huge win for RFK Racing. It's a huge stock for them. And I think it's amazing to see that they are doing tributes to Greg Biffle. I said that in my video earlier today. But I think many of us do miss Greg Biffle and wish that what had happened in December with the plane wreck had not ended up happening. But I think it's amazing to see that they are doing tributes like this. I think it's a huge win for the RFK Racing team. And I'm interested to see what other big tributes are going to be coming in honor of Greg Biffle this year. I think that's going to be something interesting to look at because we're not really having a big throwback weekend, which Dale Jr. kind of talked about that a little bit as well, that there are teams that are going to be doing throwback paint schemes. Not really a big throwback weekend, unfortunately. Yes, they're doing alumni stuff. Bob Pockers had reported on that, and Dale Jr. kind of said there should have been more emphasis on throwback weekend again, which I agree. A lot of the sponsors played a big role on why that's not happening. But I think RFK nailed it this year. They did a really good job on the throwbacks they've got for the season, and I think they do all look pretty good. And I think it's great to see they did some really awesome tribute paint schemes to Greg Biffle for next weekend at Darlington Raceway. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Darlington Raceway. Now, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of rumors about the potential fall-off we could see for the NASCAR Cup Series race at Darlington Raceway next week. Obviously, with the increased horsepower going up to 750, on top of the tires expected to be softer for the race at Darlington Raceway, which is interesting considering tires do wear a lot more. There's been a lot of talk around that, and Denny Hamlin even talked about this on his podcast. I didn't talk about it earlier in the week, but Denny Hamlin thinks that we could have 4 seconds of tire fall throughout a run during the NASCAR Cup Series race at Darlington. In an interview that Chase Briscoe had earlier today with Jeff Gluck on his Gluckcast podcast that he does every single week, Chase Briscoe actually agrees with Denny Hamlin that we could see a very chaotic race next weekend at Darlington Raceway. He says drivers are going to be slipping and sliding all over the place and expects a lot of craziness to happen and a lot of drivers to make a lot of mistakes. And he thinks that whoever hits the setup correctly is likely going to win the race and is probably going to be very untouchable in the event. This, honestly, hearing this, I know I'm getting my hopes up a little bit, but it honestly gets me really excited. Let's be real and honest. With the next-gen car, I think the racing at Darlington has been hit or miss. Sure, we've had some really exciting finishes at Darlington Raceway, but there's also been a lot of issues with this next-gen car where it is a single-group track. And one of the big issues with the next-gen car currently at the moment has been the dirty air. But with the 750 horsepower so far, which this track will have 750 horsepower, I think we could be in for a really exciting and really fun event. And I think that's what the fans generally want to see, is really, really good racing, because the racing, like I said, with this next-gen car has been super, super, super inconsistent. Well, I think we've had times where the short track racing's been good, like Darlington. A lot of that, not Darlington, but Bristol, I should say. There's been times a lot of that has a big fact from basically the tires falling off, because tires go off really crazy sometimes with this car. I do generally believe, though, that I'm certainly very, very excited about the race at Darlington a lot more, because the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series puts on a good show generally, and the Truck Series, for that matter, I think the racing's good. I want to see Darlington kind of get back to where you have to manage your stuff. At least drivers are going to have to manage their tires and take care of their stuff so they can be better in the long run. I look for guys like Brad Keselowski and Denny Hamlin, Chase Elliott, Ryan Blaney to be the guys to beat in that race more than likely, and Christopher Bell too, who can also save his tires. Guys like Larson might struggle a bit, but I do think you look at this, I think we're in for a really intriguing and really fun race at Darlington, and I think that's what the fans really, really want to see. So I hope we do see a really exciting and fun race next week at Darlington. I hope that we're not all getting our hopes up and that we're going to be disappointed. I don't expect it to be a disappointing event, though. I certainly think we could be in for a really fun race, and I think that's something that I think fans are going to be very excited for if the race is really good at Darlington Raceway next weekend. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, earlier this week in media availabilities, Kyle Larson was once again asked by Bob Pockrass about Corey Day if he's had any talks and conversations with Corey Day over the last couple of weeks, and really since he began working with Kyle. Both these guys started working together at Hendrick Motorsports back in 2024 and 2025 as well. Kyle Larson revealed to Bob Pockrass that Larson says that he hasn't really spoken much to Corey Day, but he says that when he's spoken to Corey Day, he's been lending a lot of support to Corey Day, trying to encourage him and trying to make sure he's on track, and says, you're a talented driver, you're a good driver, that's why we brought you on the team and brought you onto the organization. He also does say that a lot of drivers that are young, that are inexperienced, do make a lot of mistakes at the same time as well. I think Kyle Larson there does have a pretty good point about the fact that a lot of young drivers do make a lot of mistakes. The issue is you don't have drivers making the same mistakes every single week, and I think that was a big issue with Corey Day. Now, to Corey Day's credit, I'll say this about him. He had a really good run at Phoenix. He kept his nose clean most of the day, and while he didn't get a top 5, he finished in the top 10 and had no incidents. And when you look at Corey Day, when he's had these incidents and when he's had these mistakes, it's not like Corey Day's running horrendously. Corey Day's are running inside a top 5, a top 10 every time. At Atlanta, he was up front contending for the lead, had a flat tire supposedly, went up the racetrack and hit Justin Allgaier and Carson Quaffle and took both those guys out. Then at Circuit Americas was running inside the top 5 but turned Connor Zilic. And then, of course, last week at Phoenix had a very clean race, qualified okay, and ran pretty well and scored some decent stage points, and right now is currently in the chase. So I think that there's a lot of good things going on with Corey Day on a positive note, and I certainly hope that Kyle Larson's there lending support, because Larson, while many people compare Corey Day to Kyle Larson because Kyle Larson's mentoring him, the difference is Kyle Larson's had the success to back it up, winning 2 Cup Series championships and over 30 career Cup Series wins, and might win some more O'Reilly Auto Parts Series race this week, and is will be running the race at Las Vegas, and is certainly the favorite to win that race in that number 88 machine. But I think lending the support over to Corey Day for Kyle Larson, I think that's something that Corey Day needs. If Kyle Larson gives the support to Corey Day, I think Corey Day could definitely certainly have a lot more success going forward in this sport. So I'm really happy to hear this, that Kyle Larson's been starting to talk to Corey. I think he does need to talk to Corey to make sure Corey can be in line and doesn't make a lot of these mistakes going forward. Because if he can have a clean races like this week at Vegas, which should be fair, Corey Day last year got a top 5 in the race, so Corey might get a top 5 because Hendrick's been really good there. We'll see how things go. Nonetheless, I think it's good that Larson kind of spoke on Corey Day, as Corey Day is kind of being mentored by Kyle Larson at this point. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Nick Sanchez. Now, we all know, of course, at the end of last year, right around Christmas time, it was suddenly announced that despite the fact we all thought that Nick Sanchez would be returning to Big Machine Racing in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series in 2026, it was confirmed just days before Christmas that Nick Sanchez, in fact, would not be returning to Big Machine Racing in the 2026 year, and Patrick Sarapoli just days after Christmas would be announced to take over the number 48 car in 2026. Well, Nick Sanchez finally got the chance and opportunity to open up about exactly what happened. Now, according to what he said to Dustin Albino from JSki and NASCAR.com, he does say that he really doesn't hold a grudge against a Big Machine Racing. They made a business decision, and there's a lot of business decisions that happen in sport. Maybe he doesn't agree with it, but he understands it was a business decision. But he also feels like this is no disrespect to Patrick Sarapoli. I've never really talked to Patrick, but I feel like that I brought a lot more to the table at Big Machine Racing that Patrick Sarapoli brought to the table. Obviously, I think he's definitely was a little frustrated about how things went, because it's the last minute this announcement ended up happening, and he had to scramble for things. And at the last minute, about a month before the season started, or weeks before the season started, it was announced he joined AM Racing. This is not the same AM Racing we saw with Harrison Burton last year. They lost a lot of their support, especially with the Haas factory no longer being a 4 team and going over to Chevrolet, and AM seeing a 4 team for this year. They're basically independent, are not the fastest team out there. And I do agree with Nick Sanchez on one thing. Look, I think Patrick Sarapoli's story about him being an eye surgeon and him getting to race in NASCAR because he at one point was a development driver for Michael Waltrip Racing, I think that is actually a really cool story and a fun story at that. The problem is, when you look at this situation, right, with Patrick Sarapoli, he is 17th in the points, but Patrick's had a lot of inconsistent runs and has struggled with the points at the start of the year. Meanwhile, Nick Sanchez already had a top 5 to start 2026, and the only reason that Nick Sanchez even back there is because he had mechanical issues at Phoenix, but he's been running decently in the other races that he's been behind the wheel of the AM Racing machine, because I don't think the field is too in-depth at this point. But I think for Nick Sanchez, it's frustrating that he didn't get a top-level opportunity. I really wish that Spire would have opened up an opportunity and maybe could have opened up a third full-time truck or opened up an O'Reilly Auto Parts Series team. There were rumors about Spire Motorsports having an O'Reilly Auto Parts Series team full-time for this season. Obviously, of course, it did not end up happening. I think Nick Sanchez has certainly would have made the most sense to get behind the wheel had something like that ended up happening, but unfortunately, like I said already, that's something that did not end up happening, which I found to be very disappointing for Nick, because like I said before with Nick Sanchez, I certainly think Nick Sanchez is a talented enough driver and a capable enough driver to run up front and do a really good job on a week-by-week basis, and it certainly, like I said, was a shame that he didn't really get that chance and opportunity to prove himself with a team like that, or a smaller or bigger organization like RCR, something like that, because things kind of fell through. I hope that Nick has a good year with AM Racing. Again, it's been hit or miss start to the season. I think Nick certainly has been doing the best he can with what he's got. Hopefully Nick Sanchez can get better and show more improvement in AM Racing throughout the 2026 year and season, as well, as I think he's done a good job already at this point with some of the performances. And now we're going to head on to the next story in today's episode, as we're talking about Brad Keselowski. Now, Brad Keselowski got the chance and opportunity earlier this week to host to Dale Jr. Dowd in substitution for Dale Jr., who of course is going on vacation with his family and being on spring break as well. But one thing that caught the attention of a lot of people, including myself, was Brad Keselowski's thoughts not on the current point system, but the old point system that we ran from 2014 up until the end of 2025, the knockout system. And Brad Keselowski has some very strong comments against the previous championship system. He says the championship system, he was not a fan of the playoff system, was not a big fan of it. He says, and he told Steve O'Donnell one point back, I think in 2018 or 2019 in this podcast, he says that the playoff system really hurt the growth of the sport and stopped the sport growing in a really big way. And then he said that during his time driving for Team Penske, they would, when a driver was trying to make the playoffs at one point, for instance, like Joey Logano or potentially Ryan Blaney at one point, they would actually get Brad Keselowski not the strongest equipment to really help the other driver. We've heard rumors about this, that organizations would do this in NASCAR. This is something that is not too uncommon, but I think it certainly is interesting that we now know this story. And I think obviously what it could lead is maybe some drivers who are struggling at points in certain organizations may not be running well. I think that's what makes Kyle Larson's 2021 season so impressive in a sense, is Kyle Larson probably he wasn't even getting the best stuff and he got 10 wins. And let's not forget, Kyle Larson in 2021 had a 10-win season, should have won a lot more races. Atlanta early in the year comes to mind. Pocono, when he was leading at the white flag, had a flat tire. That one comes to mind. And some other races like the Daytona Road Course had a really strong car in that event. Circuit of the Americas, the one that Chase Elliott won. Larson had a better car that day than Chase Elliott. Had not been for rain, Kyle Larson's likely the driver going to Victory Lane at COTA, the inaugural event at that track. Kyle Larson's season there was very impressive. But I think when it comes to the playoff system, I totally agree with Brad Keselowski. The old championship system that we had from 2014 to 2025, it was a big factor why we saw a big ratings drop. Well, yes, drivers like Jimmy Johnson, Tony Stewart, Dale Jr., Jeff Gordon, Carl Edwards, big names at time for the sport, did play a big factor. Matt Kenseth, if you name it, retiring, played a factor in that. I think the playoff system hurt the sport in a big way. We were always questioning the champion every single year a lot of times. We're always looking at different formats to determine who was the best. Like last year, I think, was the straw that broke the camel's back. With Connor Daly, who should have won the championship without question, not winning the championship like he was supposed to. And other drivers not winning championships, like Corey Heim, who without question deserved the championship in 2025, had to basically make a 7-wide move to get up there and take the race lead. Not basically because of the fact he was the most deserving guy. Had to do it in a one-race championship. And I think the old format was not the way to go about it. I think this current championship format is a lot better. we're talking about race a lot more. We're not talking about playoffs. Yes, we're talking about points, but we're talking more about the performance on the racetrack, and individual races matter a lot more. I think that's why, for me, it's been more exciting this year than even prior years, as even though I'm excited for each season no matter what, I still think that this has been a more exciting start to the year because you've had more big storylines that come across, and I think that's a very important thing. So nonetheless, I agree, Brad Keselowski. I think the old playoff system, the championship system, was terrible. I think this one is a lot better. It's not perfect, but I think it's better, and wins are mattering a lot more considering the fact the top two guys in the championship and cup have won all the races, that being Tyler Reddick and Ryan Blaney, to start the season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Days of Thunder. Now, we talked about the story on the channel earlier today, but was reported by Adam Stern earlier today that a Hollywood film writer had some meetings with some NASCAR teams and drivers helped develop a plot for a Days of Thunder sequel. This writer has helped develop some big-time movies, and I believe was also involved with the Formula One movie as well. Going into the article, they basically said he went to multiple different shots. It's unknown which drivers he spoke to. My guess is he probably spoke to drivers like Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Shane Gisbergen, Carson Osebar, Bubba Wallace, Tyler Reddick, Christopher Bell, a lot of the big name guys, Carson Osebar, like I mentioned, maybe guys like Joey Logano, Ryan Blaney, drivers like Denny Hamlin, probably to talk about how the cars worked, among other things, and getting things set up for the movie to help basically plot how Days of Thunder 2 is going to go. This right here is definitely a big step to potentially Days of Thunder 2 happening. Now, we don't know what the plot of the movie is going to be, and we don't even know when the movie is going to get released. But we've been hearing a lot of rumors about it, especially since the F1 movie came out last year, and we know there's a sequel coming out for the F1 movie in the next couple of years of Brad Pitt starting. Many people were wondering when we were going to get a Days of Thunder sequel, because we've been really wanting it for a long time. Days of Thunder was a massive, massive film for NASCAR, especially when the movie came out in 1990. It has been 36 years and counting since the last time Days of Thunder was released. And we're getting almost to that 40-year point at this time. Now, when you think about some of the big actors, people like Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise, if let's say the movie does end up happening going into promotion, because they haven't even begun filming at this point, you got to think about Tom Cruise's age. Tom Cruise will be 64 at the end of this year, I believe. I think he was born in 1962. So he'll be 64 by the end of this year. If they start filming the movie, we might be waiting until 2029 or 2030 at the earliest. We may be seeing Tom Cruise almost be 7 years old by the time the movie comes out. So I'm not sure even if Tom Cruise would certainly be physical enough to do it. I'm not sure if Tom Cruise would end up being the driver. You have to kind of start thinking about who else you could bring in. I think about bringing Glenn Powell, who is part Twisters, part of Top Gun Maverick, a movie closely associated with Days of Thunder, and of course top other movies as well. And other big names could come in and be part of this, that are big actors and stuff, could be part of something like this, along with drivers like that. And imagine you have some drivers like, I don't know, Dale Jr. be involved with the movie. Maybe the Dale Jr. Download podcast gets involved in some way, shape, or form. And things maybe change from 1990, where instead of Tom Cruise's character, Cole Trickle's the driver, maybe he's a crew chief. Maybe he's a car owner. Maybe there's a lawsuit that comes out with it, because some people talked about that. I think that certainly would be a very interesting plot if something like this was to come. But I think it is nonetheless very exciting to see that there's talk of a Days of Thunder sequel. I think a lot of people certainly want to see a Days of Thunder sequel, and I hope it happens in the near and not so distant future. Glad to see they're talking about it. I hope it does happen, because I think it'd be really huge for the sport if a sequel could happen for Days of Thunder in the near and not so distant future. Hopefully it does happen very, very soon. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Legacy Motor Club. Now, we talked about the story on the channel in a video earlier today, but it was officially confirmed by Jimmy Johnson in an interview on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio that Legacy Motor Club will expand to 3 full-time cars in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2027. They will get another charter for the 2027 year. There's a lot to go in deep when it comes to this. We know Legacy Motor Club will have 4 cars on the racetrack for the 2027 Daytona 500. Jimmy Johnson will drive the number 84 car once again. So it'll be a different number for that 3rd car next year. So how are they going to have a 3rd charter in 2027? But let's go to a backstory. Last year, on April 1st, it was announced that Legacy Motor Club was suing RFK Racing. They were in the middle of a purchase agreement for a charter to go to Legacy Motor Club, where RFK Racing was going to get around $45 million. They tried to back out of that deal, and the lawsuit ended up surfacing. They eventually ended up settling, and the charter was actually being used by RFK Racing for Ryan Preece for 2025. Well, they settled on that deal, and that charter, the Legacy Motor Club, basically RFK Racing has the lease charter currently at the moment that Legacy Motor Club will have. That RFK charter will be transferred back over to Legacy Motor Club in 2026, meaning that Legacy will own that charter outright, and Rick Ware will basically be a one-charter team, and that would mean RFK might have to start looking at some other avenues to try to have 3 full-time cars, because they have 3 drivers in the team, that being Ryan Preece, Chris Buescher, and Brad Keselowski, but only 2 cars currently available at this time. One thing that could be big for RFK Racing is if, let's say, Dodge does come to the Cup Series, there is an open opportunity for 2 charters to be available if a new manufacturer comes in. My prediction is that we probably would get one of those charters, so they wouldn't be in any issues. But going back to Legacy Motor Club real quick, like I mentioned, they will have 3 cars. Who could be some potential candidates to get behind the wheel of their cars next year? The 2 names we've heard is Jesse Love and Riley Herbst. Riley Herbst because of the money side of things and the family connection, and Jesse Love because Jimmy Johnson has really praised Jesse Love, and there were rumors going into last year that Jesse was potentially a candidate for Legacy Motor Club for even 2026, but they did not have the infrastructure ready to go for that to go down. So let's go back to that real quick. Who would I choose personally if these were the 2 guys I'd go with? Well, for me, I think that Jesse Love would be the best option when it comes to performance. Jesse Love won the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series Championship in 2025, albeit Conor Daly probably should have won, but I digress. But we know that Jesse Love won the championship. He's off to a very solid start this year, and he's looked decent in some of the Cup races he ran over the last couple of years. Plus, he would have a very young team. He'd be the youngest driver on the team. John Hunter will be around 30 next year, and Eric Jones turns 30 this year. So they would have some of that veterans over there to really guide Jesse Love around Jimmy Johnson. But the other thing it tells me is the money side of things. And I look at the cost side of things. I think there's a good chance Riley Herbst could also be in this car because we think Corey Heim is going to take the third 25 race car full-time, the number 35 next year. There's a lot of expectations that likely is going to happen. So I think Riley Herbst more than likely will end up getting the seat at the moment. That's my prediction right now because Troy Herbst was actually teammates with Jimmy Johnson in the mid-400, who is a father of Riley Herbst, a legend in the off-road scene. And I think it makes a lot of sense because the money side of things offset the cost of the charter, which is $45 million. But I think there's some other candidates that could be in play. Daniel Suarez could be one to watch out for next year. I do think there's some other drivers to keep your eyes out on as well. Guys like, Daniel Suarez, Kyle Busch makes sense to me as 2 guys to watch out for. I'll mention Harrison Burton because he is a reserve driver for Legacy Motor Club this year. I think those are 3 big options you have to look at. And let's say if Kyle Busch goes to Hendrick next year, if Bowman doesn't return, maybe Bowman goes to that ride. But I think a lot of people think Alex Bowman's going to return. I don't expect Tyler Reddick to leave 23-11. I don't think people like Austin Cindric make any sense to go over to Toyota because his father is working as one of the race strategists for Team Penske currently at the moment. So who knows how things are going to go, but I think it's a big deal nonetheless that Legacy Motor Club will have that 3rd charter next year. It's a big win for that team, and I think it's a huge win for that program. They'll have 3 full-time cars next year. My prediction is it will either be Jesse Love or Riley Herbst, but I will get that seat in 2027. And now we're going to head on to the next major story in today's episode as we're talking about updates on the Joe Gibbs Racing Inspire Motorsports lawsuit. Late last night, going into early morning, Jeff Dickerson, one of the co-owners of Inspire Motorsports, put out basically his rebuttal against Joe Gibbs Racing, put out his declaration against Joe Gibbs Racing in this lawsuit. Going into a backstory, Joe Gibbs Racing is currently suing Chris Gabehart, who we know is now part of the Spire Motorsports team, and recently they added Spire Motorsports into the lawsuit as well. They are accusing Spire Motorsports and Chris Gabehart, who worked at Joe Gibbs Racing for a very long time. They're making accusations that he stole a lot of trade secrets and stole a lot of information and brought those trade secrets and information and some of the data over to Spire Motorsports. Spire Motorsports has reiterated multiple different times that is not true, and they never received any of that information over. And some of the points that I saw were very, very interesting. When it comes to the info side of things, Jeff Dickerson, and Chris also in a sense too, has basically said they don't need that information. They have an alliance with Hendrick Motorsports, which is another competing team against Joe Gibbs Racing. They don't really feel like that they need any of the information. A lot of the setup stuff, among other things, and what are they going to really learn about that? Some have indicated some of the data, some of the loop data may come into play. So maybe that's something that could go against it, but it also, when it comes to the money side of things, which Joe Gibbs Racing is asking for $8 million, That's what they're asking for, which is what they want Chris Gabehart, and I think Spire also to pay as well at this point, so it's like a technical alliance. When it comes to the day-to-day operations, Joe Gibbs Racing has said multiple different times that Chris Gabehart is basically working in a similar position to what he was working at Joe Gibbs Racing, which is the competition director. Basically, Jeff Dickerson's backs that against that and basically says that Chris Gabehart's working a different, that overarches that position and is not the same as a competition director. He continues to reiterate that Matt McCall is a competition director over at Team Matt McCall, former crew chief, who's done some crew chiefing duties in the past. I would imagine that that's something that was looked at for them, and I kind of see their point in that situation. Moving on with the private investigator. He talked about the private investigator. We talked about this on the channel earlier this week, or actually on Saturday, I believe, or Sunday, right before the race happened this week. We talked about how the private investigator had actually followed Chris Gabehart and Jeff Dickerson to a lunch at a Barcelona restaurant, which is right outside the Toyota campus. They were basically in front of everybody, and they basically had nothing to hide in that situation. Jeff Dickerson has also said multiple different times when it comes to laptops and information, Jeff Dickerson has said that they are actually willing to send that information back over to Joe Gibbs Racing and show it to the courts, and they really have nothing to hide at this point, just like the meeting. It's a little weird that a private investigator got involved at this point because it's a little weird. It's kind of wild that a private investigator had to get involved with a team to basically spy on them a little bit. I think that's weird from Joe Gibbs Racing because it seems like they're very much, because he said he's never seen anything like that before in the 25 years he's been around in the sport. And honestly, in the 20 years that I've been around as a fan, around that point, I've never seen a team have to send a private investigator to follow and watch what a team is doing at this point. They talk about Robert Smith, who is Cheddar Smith, who was a car chief for Spire Motorsports early in the year under Rodney Childers. Cheddar Smith basically was sent over to Joe Gibbs Racing. We found out how that was supposed to work out. There was supposed to be a trade of some sorts where Cheddar Smith was going to go over to Joe Gibbs Racing, and they were going to get an engineer back in the program. That deal never ended up going out. They were going to pay $100,000 for that and even asked JGR just to pay the money, but Joe Gibbs Racing turned that down. I'm not really sure how that's going to entirely work out in regards to maybe like a lack of trust and maybe some toxicity among other things and working with other teams and organizations. I mean, Michael Fatback McSwain kind of talked about how he lost his contract with Joe Gibbs Racing and the team just crumbled around that time, and Bobby Labonte started falling at that point. So take it what you will. They also talk about the situation with Ty Gibbs, basically saying that Chris Gabehart had to basically babysit. There was a lot of turmoil at that point. At the end of the day, when it comes to this lawsuit, the main thing is going to be what info was taken and what trade secrets were provided over to Spire Motorsports. If they provide that in the courts, it could be a win for Joe Gibbs Racing. Now, some of the information put out there, I think there's some relevance to some of this stuff. I think there's some other stuff, and Eric brought this up in his video yesterday. Go check that video out. He basically did kind of say some things that I agree with. I think there's some relevance at some points, other points, not so much. Obviously, Denny Hamlin, he had his own comments as well, where Denny Hamlin basically did quintessentially defend Joe Gibbs Racing as much as I think he was friends with Gabehart not too long ago. I can't really side with them because his team is affiliated, that being 25 Racing, is very much affiliated with over there at Joe Gibbs Racing. They get a lot of their support over there. So I think at this point when it comes to the lawsuit, reminder, there's a hearing that is actually coming up very, very soon. On Monday, as a matter of fact, there's going to be a hearing happening between Joe Gibbs Racing Spire and Chris Gabehart with the preliminary injunction. I'm not sure if a ruling will come out on Monday or if that will come out on Tuesday or Wednesday. Probably sometime early next week, we'll get a ruling on that, whether Chris Gabehart can continue to work at the team. It'll be interesting to see how that ruling goes and how the judge rules in favor or against Chris Gabehart if he gets a chance to work at Spire Motorsports in TWG Global going forward. And now we're going to head jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about RFK Racing once again. Now, there was some talk and discussion around RFK Racing and the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series. First, on the most recent Dale Jr. download, where it sounded like Brad Keselowski kind of expressed some interest maybe on wanting to bring RFK Racing a little bit back down to the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, but talked about the cost as well. And recently, in an interview with Peter Strada, who works with TSJ Sports, he kind of talked a little bit about this as well, speaking to him. He says that there's been talk and discussion. They continue to have some discussions, internal discussions, about the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series for the team. But he says, we don't want really it to affect the Cup Series program. What does Brad mean by that? Well, the main thing comes down to something called money. money is a big thing. And Brad Keselowski does say in order to start an O'Reilly Auto Parts Series team, it's going to cost around $15 to $20 million to have an O'Reilly Auto Parts Series team. And they're going to need a ton of funding and they're going to need a ton of sponsorship to really come into play on that front. Now, the good thing for Brad Keselowski and RFK Racing, they would have a big sponsor to probably be able to back them. That, of course, being the Kroger Company, who has a lot of brands and funding. Well, yes, they do fund the Cup Series program. I think Kroger would be willing to spend that money to help on the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series side. So the funding would be not as big of an issue there, at least on the sponsorship side. But then you got to look at the driver market. And Brad had kind of talked about this on the podcast. He'd like to have some Cup Series influence get involved with it, have Cup Series guys go down. So that would be guys like himself, of course, guys like Ryan Preece, and even Chris Buescher, who drive for RFK Racing in the Cup Series. They would all probably be drivers that would be involved as well. But the interesting thing to me is who else could they choose to get behind? Because, of course, there's been a lot of talk, right, about the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series in Ford's involvement. Right now, Ford only technically has 2 cars on the racetrack in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series. Sometimes they do have a third car currently at the moment. That third car, which is the second AM racing machine that Daniel Dye ends up driving for the 52. But the main 2 cars we see every week is a 5-car driven by different drivers. This week it's going to be Chandler Smith. A couple weeks ago, it was Tyler Gonzalez who failed to qualify. Then Luke Fenhaus drove the first 2 races. And then so far, Nick Sanchez has been the only main driver behind the wheel in every single race so far in 2026. And there's always a ton of big questions currently at the moment. What's going to happen and who else could be part of Ford? There was talk of Team Penske having a program in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series in 2026. And there's even been people speculating a rumor that Penske might be getting involved with the AM Racing team in some way, shape, or form. There's some questions around that team at this time, but I do think it's unknown what's going to happen there. So people thought RFK Racing could be one of those teams that could go down to the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series. And I think that there is a chance and possibly that it could happen. Now, let's say down the road, if RFK wasn't open up an O'Reilly Auto Parts Series team, let's say in 2027, not saying that's going to happen, but let's say that would happen in the near future. What drivers could end up getting involved with it? Well, I think there's a lot of options you could have available for something like that, like maybe a Parker Retzlaff. Brad Keselowski has praised Parker Retzlaff many, many times over the last couple years. And when I think of drivers who have shown so much promise and a lot of potential, I think Parker Retzlaff is one of the main guys that does certainly come to mind. I think Parker's a very talented young driver, and I think if you gave him the right opportunity with a top-level organization, I think he'd do really strong. He's been really good with Viking Motorsports. He did really good with Jordan Anderson Racing in some races, did really good with RSS Racing when they were a Ford organization, and looking at other teams like Alpha Prime and other organizations, and what he did with MBM in particular a couple years ago at Richmond or last year, he was really strong with that team and program because he had to run that race to get approved to run Daytona the next week in the 31, so he had to drive the 66 and was pretty competitive, one of the more competitive drivers we've seen in the number 66 machine. But I do think for RFK Racing in particular especially, I think it comes down to funding. Now, there's other guys they could certainly look at as well, right? We could look at other big names like a Lane Riggs. Lane Riggs has been rumored to the 4-car for next year. There's been some talk about that. I know there's been some talk about Carson Kvapil joining the Ford side of things in the future. He could be a sleeper for one of the Cup Series rides down the road. And I think there's even other guys that we're not even truly thinking about at this point. Other drivers are certainly could be candidates, like a Chandler Smith. Chandler Smith, to me, makes a lot of sense. The Chandler Smith, I thought, would be one of the guys who could have been a candidate to drive an RFK Racing seat as a substitution driver for Brad Keselowski. He had to miss more races. That would have made a lot of sense to me. And I think about Joey Hand being down the road, Logan Sargent being other candidates who could race full-time, and even Corey LaJoie could be a full-time driver RFK with him being a reserve driver for the team and program currently at this particular moment in point. But I think it's interesting that Brad kind of talked about this, and I think it'd be interesting if RFK Racing did get that chance and opportunity to open up a full-time team in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series again. I think that'd be huge for the sport. I hope it's something that does happen in the near and not-so-distant future. Certainly, I do think it could be a big win shall something like that end up taking place down the road in the future. So we'll see what happens in regards to RFK Racing and their future in NASCAR, and we'll see if they do have a team in the O'Reilly Series down the road. I hope it does happen because I think it'd be a big win for the sport if they could have an O'Reilly Auto Parts Series team maybe in 2027 or maybe in 2028. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, We've talked about Kyle Busch a lot on this channel in the early portion of 2026. We know at the start of the year, he got a new crew chief, Jim Pullman, who worked with Justin Allgaier last year, and things started off on a really good note between both those guys. But this past week at Phoenix International Raceway, and shout out to Kyle Dalton, who does some really good stuff on YouTube when it comes to reporting and other stuff on Twitter. He got a big radio insight that came out where you could definitely tell that Kyle Busch and Jim Pullman and Derek Nealon were not very happy with each other about basically how Kyle Busch hit the outside wall, and Kyle Busch seemed very nonchalant, but seemed to be frustrated. Meanwhile, Jim Pullman and other people on the team seem to be very frustrated as well with Kyle Busch's performance in that event. And I think there's been a lot of talk about this. Obviously, Kyle Busch, he did rebound in the race, right, and finished 17th. But let's be real and honest with ourselves. Kyle Busch did not run well in this race. He was 34th to 35th in the early portion of the race. He had 3 or 4 flat tires in the race. And basically, he was slow in having flat tires. That is a definitely combination that you really don't want to have in a race, especially when you're one of the few teams that's consistently having flat tires. There were 2 or 3 guys that were having flat tires consistently. Shane Van Gisbergen had 2 or 3, still came back to finish almost in the top 10. And Connor Zilch had like 4 or 5 in the race. And Connor Zilch fell out of the race because they damaged a certain part of the car, like the brakes, I'm pretty sure, got damaged on the car. And Connor went to the garage because of it. For Kyle Busch, though, you think about this season. There was a lot of really big excitement with Jim Pullman coming on with the team. Jim Pullman obviously worked with Justin Allgaier. They won a championship just a few years ago. And Jim Pullman had worked with RCR a few years back. But I've said this before. I don't think Jim Pullman is truly the problem at Richard Childress Racing. I think the problem right now is the team itself. Kyle Busch isn't a problem, and Jim Pullman isn't a problem. Is Kyle Busch as good as he used to be? No, absolutely not. I don't think Kyle Busch is as strong as he was when he has his peak from 2015 up until the end, or really 2013 for that matter, up until the end of 2019. He did struggle somewhat in his final years at JGR, but he still got multiple wins in 2021, and 22 still got a win, and should have won more races in 2022, and maybe even 2021 as well at that. But for Kyle Busch, I think everyone kind of knows at this point, he's already off to one of the worst starts he's had in his season, despite having multiple top 20 finishes. He's off to one of the worst starts he's had at this point. And there's been a lot of talk and a lot of rumors about Kyle Busch's future at the team. I think there's actually a very good chance and a very strong possibility that Kyle Busch may not end up being at RCR in 2027. In fact, there's even been outside talk and conversations as of recently from some people, not saying insiders, but something that Kyle Busch might not even finish the season at RCR if things don't continue to get better. Now, could things certainly improve? Absolutely. And I think Kyle Busch wants to hopefully make things better because there was resilience in the team. But I think right now at this point, when I'm looking at things, I think it's very likely Kyle Busch will not be back at RCR in 2027. I just don't see that happening. Now, I think there's a good chance Kyle Busch finishes the season, but if things don't turn around quickly, who knows at this point what's going to happen. So let's say Kyle Busch doesn't return to RCR in 2027. What could be some options for Kyle going into next year? There's a lot of different options. A lot of teams are going to be available. Some are going to mention a 7-car for Spire Motorsports. I think this is the most likely landing spot. Yes, Daniel Suarez has been off to a pretty solid start in Cup this year, but he did have some flaws in the last couple of weeks and is currently sitting 17th after being in the chase in the first 3 events of the year. He's fallen out of that and is lowest of the drivers in the Spire points. I think if you put Kyle Busch in that number 7 car, he certainly would do better, in my opinion, than Daniel Suarez would do. There's also potential the 71 car could be available. McDowell, from what I understand, is in a contract year with Spire Motorsports as well. He only signed a 2-year deal with the team. So I do think there's a chance and possibility that we could see a guy like Michael McDowell go away and Busch could take the 71 because he seems to be happier over at Spire because he won the Truck Series race. Seemed to be actually happy to work at Carson Osavar for once. And I think that that could be a potential dynamic duo that works together very, very well. So Spire is an option. The next option is going back to Hendrick Motorsports in driving a number 48. The 48 is certainly interesting. I still think it's likely Alex Bowman is going to come back and perform okay, but Bowman's right now out because of the vertigo issues and the health issues currently at the moment. And there certainly is a lot of concern about Alex Bowman's health at this particular moment in time. It's unknown if Bowman will be healthy enough to continue racing past this year at this point. Hopefully that's the case. He can continue racing. Because if Bowman is healthy enough to continue racing, he should be in that 48 car for the next 2 years. But if his health isn't that good, he comes back as a foreman. Well, do you put Kyle Busch in as a stopgap driver for 2 years to try to get Corey Day and Roger Krug the potential to develop and get better. I think that's something you could look at as something to do because Elliott's going to be in a contract at the end of next year, so you could have 2 rides that are available from Hendrick if that goes down. Then you have the Legacy Motor Club car. I think that's an option potentially, but I don't know if that's going to be a full option at this point. Some mentioned a 2-car with Penske. I don't believe Kyle Busch and Joey Logano have the best working relationship, but that would be a top-level opportunity. Plus, it could open an opportunity for a Penske Indy car in the future. Obviously, I think that's something that Kyle Busch wants to do is still do the Indy 500. He kind of talked about that actions detrimental not so long ago, albeit he's basically running out of time to do that with him being in his early 40s at this point. But for Kyle Busch, again, I think it's very likely his last year at RCR. I just think there's a lot of frustration. And I feel like that things are not at a good point. He need to have a much better start to 2026. And so far, things have just not been clicking. So I think more than likely, Kyle Busch will not return to RCR. I think tensions are brewing at this point, and likely Kyle Busch will not be back at RCR next year. And it wouldn't surprise or shock me if Kyle Busch is out at RCR before the end of 2026, which either Jessev or Austin Hill will be the likely replacement for Kyle Busch if he isn't to return to the team after this year. So, that's for today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Notifications on so if I win a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram and support me on Patreon as well. List goes from below that and comment your thoughts below on today's video. You think Kyle Busch is going to finish his season and stay at RCR after this year or not? Learn your thoughts in comments below. And what are thoughts about other stories talked about today on the channel, like news on RFK Racing's future, maybe in the O'Reilly series? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If there's any other major news that breaks later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. Tomorrow on the channel, we're going to have reactions to Cup Series qualifying in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series race from Vegas. And then Sunday, we'll have the starting lineup video for the Cup race at Vegas and the race debut and maybe a Shane Van Gisbergen video if he does really well. Then on Monday, we should have a NASCAR news video dropping. Got a lot of content coming up. People like Haley Deegan, Shane Van Gisbergen, Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bo Wallace, Ross Chastain, Charlie Craig, Sam Ayer, Frankie Muniz, Cletus Avon, Dodge Ram, Tony Stewart, Casey Kane, Greg Biffle, Connor Zolch, Junior Motorsports, Daniel Suarez, Eric Almirola, Josh Berry, Michael Jordan, Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, all the good stuff to talk about on the channel in the coming days and weeks as well. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.